After all this, you still...
I still want that gas, yes. And you had better deliver.
Oh, man. I'll tell you what. I'm like scared to actually finish the story for Tears of the Kingdom.
Oh, yeah?
I just like don't want it to end. I know that it's probably like the same setup as Breath of the Wild, where like, yeah, you finish the game, but it'll just always take you back to your save right before you finish.
Yeah.
But I don't know. There's just so much more to do in this game.
There's a lot, yeah. I mean, they tripled the size of the map, right? You know?
You've got the sky, you've got the underground, and then you've got just everything else that's updated on the main floor. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess, probably doubled, then, I don't know how much is in the sky, but decent chunk.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, you can fly around the whole map. So as long as you've got your quad bike or whatever.
Yeah, it's true.
Okay. I guess what order did you do the temples in?
I did sky, sky, fire, water, then thunder or whatever.
Yeah, I think I did Thunder Temple last. I think you could probably do the fire and water temples like interchangeably, but the game pretty much pushes you in that direction.
Yeah, I mean the Sky Temple is definitely like the one. Like I think the ability is just the most useful.
Yeah. Anyways, that's our extended Tears of the Kingdom discussion. That's why we've both been absent from the podcast.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I as someone who did finish the story, though, I mean, I think I think you'll enjoy it. I mean, you've gotten through most of the game, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty much at the part where like the Zelda Phantom appears at Hyrule Castle. Sorry, spoiler.
Yeah, there's a vibe that like that whole like that final stretch of the game, like starting there is, there's some really fun vibes there, in my opinion. I think it's really good stuff, really exciting, and I think you're gonna enjoy it.
For sure. Well, I won't let the game keep me from the show. And for sure, we're back here with another episode of Greenhouse Gaslighting. It's me and Josh. And we're back with our Democalypse 2024 coverage.
We sure are.
Now, I'll admit it's been a bit rough to like keep my ear to the ground on a lot of this, but I was not and I know people are going to be like, well, you guys are late to the party. No, we always wait for the dust to settle before we start giving our takes. But this was the resurrection of a story that was hitting the airwaves like pretty hard last year, right? With the
yeah, I mean, we finally have Hunter Biden indicted.
That's another one. That's another one.
I mean, that's obviously the joke is, yeah, I haven't really looked too much into that one, to be honest with you. It's kind of always just been like this sort of right, but like I think I saw like a lot of his charges are like tax related, and I think there might be like a gun ownership charge, and it's like, man, like
that's about what I read.
Yeah, it's like, man, the legal charges that they're like bringing up against their little avatar of hatred is the stuff they don't even believe you should be legally accountable for anyways. So funny how that works out.
Yeah, it's like there's a big thing about like, oh, did Hunter get off easy on this one because he's the president's son? I mean, question.
I mean, I've seen some of those leaked bathtub pictures. He was getting off pretty easy, if you ask me.
I mean, it's like, I'm not here to defend the Biden family from criticism. Like, what was Kushner up to during his tenure in the Trump White House? As far as I can tell, the presidential fail son / corrupt son score seems pretty even.
Well, I mean, probably, a little bit more in favor of the Trumps. I mean, you've got kind of like all three Trump sons are kind of all, Biden, at least, he's got the one problem son, the one dead son, and does he have another son?
I don't know.
I don't remember. I'm not, not up on my American royal families as much as, maybe some people are.
Oh god, we've got two. We've got the new Irish royalty in the Biden family, and we've got the old one with RFK coming back in the Democratic primary. Is that it?
Yeah, we sure do.
Oh boy.
But yeah, I mean, from the side tangent that I, kind of distracted. Obviously, yeah, like, this is kind of the case were tied to, Trump's documents that he had stolen, the Mar-a-Lago raid and whatnot. That was kind of, God, when did that happen?
I think that happened last
It happened
year
like
or
last
so. Right?
year, yeah, because I was gonna say it happened like right before the semester started because I remember talking about it in my class, and kind of like certain, you know, like how like it's sort of facilitated and all that stuff. Yeah, so it was like maybe like 10 months ago.
And I think that's the thing about trying to follow U.S. domestic news. It's a sticking point for me. I know that you can kind of counteract this with discipline, but these stories will be like a big blowout event, like when they first get reported on and they get subjected to the whole 24-hour news cycle, and they
And
get
by the
put
time you
through.
get anything out of it, it's usually like anything real and substantive out of it. It's kind of watered down in like terms of the coverage at that point. I mean, this time maybe a slight exception to that rule, just because of the nature of the just the sheer volume of what's happened and like the gravity of like a lot of these charges against Trump tied to those documents. But a lot of everything else, right? It's like by the time it gets resolved, it's kind of even if it is a more substantial story, it's sort of treated by the media as something of like a nothing burger.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Is like when it first got reported on, all the facts of the case don't come out, right? So you're like,
Right.
how seriously do I take this? And then once it goes through the slow machine of the legal process, it gets memory hold, and then here we are back with the indictment. So it's like, okay, it didn't go. It's not that it went nowhere. It's like it goes into the black box of the legal system, and then it comes back out with the indictment.
Yeah.
And then you realize, oh, it's not only as bad as we thought it was, it's even funnier than we thought it was.
Right. I mean, this story is like, there's hilarity to it. I know some people are kind of like concerned about like the danger of some of the stuff. I don't necessarily think that like anyone's lives were necessarily lost as a result of this, at least, so far. But, this is kind of the stuff that, I think lesser people, in terms of like, public relevance have been disappeared over. And knowing that like the former president, committed them there's a certain level of humor in that.
Hey, and it's like I almost wonder, was he just like, let's just grab everything we can and I'll comb through it when I get a chance?
God, what was it?
Only
The most recent interview? I caught a couple clips from it, but he like talks about where he's like, well, there might have been some of my personal belongings in there. I don't want to like leave anything behind. And it's like, I mean, like a really flimsy excuse, but it's just like I guess it was just kind of like take everything and kind of comb through it. I mean, from what we've read from the transcript of the unsealing of the case, right? It's very clear, like, and everything that like that was like sort of the defense for Trump from like the intellectual cruiserweights of the right, like Ben Shapiro and whatnot, was like, well, he just did this by accident. He didn't know any better, blah, blah, blah. Which, I mean, again, like any other circumstance, you wouldn't give a shit about their intent, right? It's just because it's your boy that you have to care. But, I mean, it's pretty clear, from all accounts, from like, the tape leaks and whatnot, that we have about him, that this is pretty much it was intentional, right? Like there was multiple efforts to, even when they were turning over some of the documents willfully before the raid, there's multiple attorneys involved, right? Where he has like the one who's like responsible for turning it in, but then the other he has like before that guy turns it in, just combing through all the interesting stuff and taking it out. So I don't know if that was just pure like he actually intended to like sell these off or just, keep them for shits and giggles. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't necessarily matter one way or the other in terms of the law, or if this was just like, oh man, like if they realize just what I have access to, this will be really bad. So like, let's, prevent them from finding out.
I will say, if you are running an illegal document heist, do not store all of them in what appears to be a Florida basement bathroom.
Right? I mean, it's funny because it's like
the water damage risk. Oh my god!
Well, it's like it's in Mar-a-Lago, and like you can just. I mean, I don't know about right now, but like generally speaking, you could just go to Mar-a-Lago, right?
Yeah.
Like I mean, I assume there's like a membership and whatnot you have to like buy and you maybe apply for and whatnot, but like it's not hard. Like I mean, like literally where these documents were in some cases, like just someone who was like drunk and opened the wrong door could have just stumbled upon like nuclear secrets and all kinds of fun illicit things.
Oh my god, it's. I think it's like you never know where to draw the line on. Is some of the Trump coverage like, how serious do you take it, and versus like how much of this is like a kind of like a gay, Democrat, Occupy Democrats Facebook page kind of behavior, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's like you can't like view Trump as this like criminal genius. He's not this super spy Bond villain. However, he is incredibly like precocious and like just highly like obsessed with this need to like get attention and validation in this very craven way, but he's not smart. Doesn't have finesse. He doesn't have any of that. So it just seems like such like it's such a classic dumb guy move to be like, I'm going to steal slow documents indiscriminately, and we're just gonna hide them in a basement somewhere, and we're just gonna see what comes of it. It's brilliant. I don't know how else to look at it.
Yeah, and like some of this, like what he was like doing, because we actually have like some transcripts of what he was actually doing with the documents. And I figure to kind of illustrate it to especially those who may not have followed the story as closely, right? I figured we should read this stuff, right? Like, so I sent you the transcript of like the case filing.
Did you see it on screen?
Yeah. So page 15 is right where we get like one of these phone call or one of these recordings with him. So I guess I'll play the role of Trump, and you can play these the writer and staffer.
So let's give a
little bit of context. Is that this is giving an interview about him planning to attack. Like he's talking about basically his interaction with the senior military official, and his plan to attack country A, which is, I mean, we pretty much know it's Iran, right? I don't know why that's redacted. I mean, I guess just to save face, but like everyone knows that like any reporting you've heard about the Trump White House is like you've heard that he 100% wanted to like just nuke Iran to kingdom come. But anyways, well, with the senior military official, let me see that. I'll show you an example. He said that I wanted to attack country A. Isn't it amazing? I had a big pile of papers. This thing just came up. Look, this was him. They presented me this. This is off the record, but they presented me this. This was him. This was the Defense Department and him.
Wow.
We looked at some. This was him. This wasn't done by me. This was him. All sorts of stuff. Pages long. Look. Wait a minute. Let's see here.
Hand laughter. Yeah.
I just found, isn't that amazing? This totally wins my case,
Mm-hmm.
Except it is like highly confidential.
Yeah, canned laughter.
Secret. This is secret information. Look at this. You attack, and by the way, isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
I was just thinking because we were talking about it, and he said he wanted to attack country A, and what?
You did.
This was done by the military and given to me. I think we could probably, right?
I don't know. We'll have to see. Yeah, we'll have to try to
Declassify it.
figure out yeah.
See, as president, I could have declassified it.
Yeah, can.
Now I can't, but this is still a secret.
Yeah, canned laughter. Now we have a problem.
Isn't that interesting?
So reading further, at the time of this exchange, the writer, the publisher, and Trump's two members did not have security clearances or any need to know any classified information about a plan of attack. A.
So he's like basically like using this information as like almost like, and like there's one where he's like talking to like just some PAC representative, right? Just like some little like just political campaign fundraiser, right? And it's like the same thing, identical to it, but it's just like it's he clearly demonstrates not only that like he's in fact sharing this information, sharing classified information, intentionally keeping classified information, all that stuff. It's also like just like the whole argument about like, oh well, because he said like, well, as president, I can just like think about it and boom, declassified, right? Whereas here you're saying that like full concession that like, yes, he did not declassify it. Yes, it is illegal, and it's just like. It's just funny that he has it, right? That's basically his reaction to it. It's like, oh, isn't this cool? Isn't this interesting? Like the way you would show off, like, your parents' car to like a girl you're trying to impress, right? It's like that's exactly like what we're getting out of this. Like it's the same level of I don't know what you call it here, but it's the same level of like, just like that's basically what Trump is in this situation.
Yeah, he didn't. That's what's getting me about all of this, right? Is like declassifying documents is the purpose of revealing the information is to obtain a political goal. So you can only do that if you've combed through said documents. This guy does not read for the life of him. Okay, we know he picked up a book since grade school.
Oh, 100%, right? I mean, he probably didn't even read his own ghostwritten books.
Probably not, right? So it's like. It's like, I don't know what the end game is here, other than like the usual Trump like bragging to anyone he meets to feel better about himself. I think this is like you could probably like reach and be like, oh, is he just trying to like fish for someone who would comb through it on his behalf and like find something expedient for him to use or whatever? But I just think it's more imagine him. Just like being like, yeah, look, guys, I stole these documents as a fuck you to them. Look at me.
Yeah, pretty much. And it's just like, is it like, it's like, I stole this. Isn't that interesting? This is illegal. Isn't that interesting? There's one later on where he's talking about, what is it exactly? But he's like talking, to someone and saying like, oh, well, you better not get too close. This is like classified information that I shouldn't have. As if like their physical proximity to it changes the fact that like they're seeing an illegal document.
Oh God. Oh, here it is. On May 23rd, 2022, Trump met with Trump Attorney 1 and Trump Attorney 2 at the Mar-a-Lago Club to discuss the response to the May 11th subpoena. Trump Attorney 1 and Trump Attorney 2 told Trump that they needed to search for documents that would be responsive to the subpoena and provide a certification that there had been compliance with the subpoena. Trump, in sum and substance, made the following statements, among others, as memorialized, that's an interesting word, by Trump Attorney 1. I don't want anybody looking. I don't want anybody looking through my boxes. I really don't. I don't want you looking through my boxes. Well, what happens if we just don't respond at all or don't play ball with them? Wouldn't it be better if we just told them we don't have anything? Well, look, isn't it better if there are no documents?
Yeah, like this, like he doesn't have like the level of sophistication needed to like get away with something like this. And I think like that's like one of the things too, right? What you were talking about, like, with the Trump stuff, you'd never know, like, is this like kind of just, opposed Dem, like Twitter or social media, whatever, kind of like responding to like everything he does, or is it something more serious? And I think like we've kind of hit that like boy who cried wolf scenario where just like we've been like just waiting for like some act of God to sort of take him out, right? And this is probably the closest you're gonna get. Obviously, if I don't necessarily know the full level of legal repercussions for it. I mean, I'm pretty sure like I'd be shocked if he gets off the hook for this. Like they intend to go for this case pretty quickly, and to me that shows they've got a lot of burden of proof on it. And I think that like the fact that they would even prosecute him at all, I think says a lot, because I think that was sort of like I think they wanted to avoid the politics of that as desperately as possible, even if this isn't done by like the DOJ, right? It's done by like a special counsel. I think that there was just still like that desire to like just desperately avoid having to hold him to account. But I think the level of like stuff going on here is just so severe that I think they really had to like act against it.
I could not imagine being Trump. This many cases against me, first and foremost.
Right. I mean, there's that, and does this yeah, I think this has the number of charges just in like this case, right? So this is
let's go to this. That would be on the front page, right?
I think so. There's 37 counts. So yeah, like at the end they kind of list them and explain what they are. But yeah, I mean, there's a ton of counts, including violations of like the Espionage Act and all of this, like just wonderful stuff that again, like people of less renown would get disappeared over. And here it is, and this document too also has like fun little pictures of the the way the documents were being stored and whatnot. So if you look at, here's the count. So counts 1 through 31 are willful retention of national defense information, 16 USC 793E. 32 is conspiracy to obstruct justice. The max prison term for those 31 counts are 10 years of mandatory imprisonment. There's no minimum one. 20 years for the conspiracy to obstruct justice. Count 33, withholding a document or record, that is a max sentence of 20 years. So, like, basically, like, found guilty on a number of these, he's basically in prison for the rest of his life.
Dear God.
Count 34, corruptly concealing a document or record. Count 35, concealing a document in a federal investigation. 36, scheme to conceal. I like that, the name of that, just like scheme to conceal. And then 37 is false statements and representation, and that's kind of tied to the stuff with his other lawyer, Waltine Nalta, who also is subject to a number of these penalties as well, a number of charges as well, due to his role in kind of aiding and abetting this. So, I mean, I think the strategy here too is probably, I would be shocked if whoever's elected, whoever's the nominee for the Republican Party, just says that they'll like promise to pardon Trump. I think that's probably just going to be their strategy going forward. I mean, and heck, to be fair, Trump did pardon a few of their corrupt guys. In fact, I actually just went through a few of them in my data collection on congressional retirements recently that they left, and then he quickly pardoned them when he got the chance.
Yeah. Oh gosh, so with all this being said, as yet another another blemish on Trump's legal standing so far, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what are the implications for this in the Republican primary right now?
I really don't know. I mean, I'm not sure that there necessarily are any. Even if it's not entirely, because we're in sort of uncharted waters, right? I mean, like we know people can run from prison and whatnot. I mean, like with these charges, that's maybe a little different. I don't necessarily know because, like, you know, the precedent of a presidential candidate running is like, you know, the socialist candidate, right? And then, like, you know, was that a serious contender in that particular election? Probably not, but and especially considering he was just, you know, sort of jailed for political beliefs. But this is like it's a little different, and right now I don't think we've really seen like let's check like 538 real quick. My gut is we haven't really seen any shift in like polling. GOP primary polls,
And I'm even just trying to think because aside from maybe just intensifying what already, like what lines already exist politically, you know?
yeah.
I mean, you have Trump's hilarious statement of "I did everything right, and they still indicted me." Like, I'm not sure what it does other than just like it just makes everyone like a little more just like dig trenches deeper. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I think that's really what it is, right? I think it's sort of I mean, like the strategy from him was always obvious that like, oh, it's a witch hunt, blah blah blah. I mean, that was always obvious. Like, anyone who's acting surprised by that, has serious brain damage and should probably see a doctor.
okay,
But yeah, so like looking at the presidential primary, right now he's still at like 52.5%. DeSantis has, and Trump has pointed this out, has gone down steadily over time. Um, you know, it's like just barely like inching out over time, but it's just, he keeps going lower and lower. And like Trump's lost a few points, but I think that's kind of just like the nature of like just having like a million fucking choices in this primary, right? Like there's probably a few people who are like, oh, you know, like, you know, at least early on, like kind of entertain the idea of a different candidate that's not Trump. But I don't necessarily think that, like, you know, you see someone like Nikki Haley drop out. I don't think you see that person necessarily go for DeSantis. Pence is officially in the race. God knows why.
I mean, what didn't he literally say that like he's running on hopes and dreams?
I think he did, yeah, and you know that's kind of apropos. I mean, to be fair, these candidates, I don't know who their handlers are. They should probably be fired. The fact that Ron DeSantis recently, when in responding to some like criticism from like Gavin Newsom, so probably some like, you know, more left wing criticism, right? Had said like the truth is in the pudding. So of course the fucking Trump campaign makes a supercut of it where they put their ad of, you know, Ron pudding fingers on it, and it's like this is like you know that this is the attack has been like the whole like that you eat pudding with fingers, Ron pudding fingers, all that stuff, and like you're gonna say the truth is in the pudding. Like, what an idiot. And as I said, like Mike Pence, I mean, I honestly I would cross over and vote for him in the primary if he just finally came out and said that Donald Trump was right to want him to die. Like, he's basically all but done that. If he just literally came out and said that, I would have more respect for him, because that's basically been his position, that like he did nothing wrong despite the fact that my life was in danger.
That's something like I'm really not sure like what lane Pence of all people is competing for. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, like he like, everyone was like pretty
he can't
convinced.
even claim the anti-Trump lane. He can't.
Exactly, he can't, and like that was always what everyone thought he was like angling for. But then like very quickly he turned against them. I think, you know, maybe there's just sort of this acknowledgement that like the anti-Trump lane doesn't really exist in any meaningful fashion, and you know, maybe I would agree with that, but like it's certainly like what lane is it that like these people are occupying? Just like, and like he doesn't even have anything going for him, where like, you know, I think like Tim Scott like saying that like, oh yeah, like racism's not real, there's an appeal to a black guy saying that, right, in the Republican primary, right? There's an appeal to like someone who like kind of knows his place, so to speak. Is it enough to win? Probably not, but at least it's something niche and, you know, unique. What does Pence really have going for him at this point?
And that's what I was kind of trying to get at, is like Pence comes up in like the Tea Party era, you know what I mean, as like the somewhat further right opposition to Obama. And guess what? That entire movement has been sublimated into
Yeah.
either like Trump or like the national conservative freak show. You know what I mean? Like it's dissipated. It doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, I don't think there's like really like I mean, heck, I know there was this one like kind of like I can't remember if it was Politico or Washington Post. It was some like DC insider type thing, but it was like talking about a potential Ted Cruz run and the fact that he's like trying to like build moderate credentials and whatnot. And like that was sort of like your like spirit animal for the Tea Party, right? Was Ted Cruz. And now he's like trying to be like, oh, I'm trying to like occupy a moderate lane, which is like obscene, right? Like back in the day, he was seen as like the most conservative, like the most deranged member of Congress from the Republican Party, and like that's probably no longer true. I don't think he's a moderate by any stretch, even by their standards. But like, it's you know, I mean, like it's like the notion that like that true like thoroughbred Tea Party exists anymore. It just doesn't. It's you know like the Freedom Caucus, which was sort of its like congressional arm, right? I mean, it still exists, but you had like Justin Amash, former chair of it, disavow the party and leave. You have whoever else is there now is just a Trump stooge. There's no meaningful distinction between what the Tea Party is and what's just a MAGA Republican, to borrow a term.
I mean, quite honestly, yeah. It's like we probably should do like a field guide to modern Republicans at some point. But you're 100% spot on. Where it's like everyone who was in like the Tea Party mold has picked their lane, and Mike Pence was like, you would think he figured that out by the time he got the VP role. But again, I don't know. Classic.
And when he was
Indiana
never really like. I mean, I guess he was governor, so he was a little bit more prominent, but he was never really that relevant at a national level prior to being VP.
No, not at all. He was like, I mean, what did he have other than being governor of Indiana and like
he was a representative, but
he was a representative as part of the Tea Party, and then like he was a conservative talk radio guy. So that's about it as far as I can tell.
But again, in all of those capacities, he's like the least noteworthy example of those, right? Maybe not the least noteworthy governor in the sense that he was, he actually became VP, but like he wasn't, like the most relevant, like, former governor or whatever in terms of like, like he wasn't necessarily leading. He wasn't Scott Walker, right? He wasn't, someone that was sort of like kind of reinventing what it meant to be a conservative or anything like that.
No, not at all.
I think as a representative, relatively unremarkable. Not anyone like not anyone at like the profile of someone like what we might think of like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert today.
Oh God,
there's nothing like nothing he's done has ever been like, and obviously talk radio, right? I mean, like he's a poor man's Rush Limbaugh.
Well, and more than that too, it's like Rush Limbaugh he cut his bones being like disgusting and like really just saying hateful shit on air, and then like Pence was saying the same shit, but like not cussing, not being mean, and like doing the nice Midwest boy version of it, Right. And I think like on this broader note, right? Like we have to talk about the myth of the moderate Republican, right? First of all,
sure.
I'm not sure that such a concept exists post New Deal, right? But to that end, right? It's like whatever definition people had for moderate Republican, I think like has fully dissipated post 2016. That was like what the lane that like John Kasich, George Pataki, and others occupied, and that fully disappeared from public consciousness at this point.
Yeah, and I think it's really a few things that are going on, right? I think like to an extent post Watergate, you still have them in the sense that the parties are less polarized, and what I mean by that is that they are like you have some. Actually, like you have some Republicans that are substantially more liberal than some Democrats, and vice versa. For a while, that kind of, I don't necessarily know if it's like Watergate that sort of fully susses those people out, but around then you start seeing like a lot of people. Like there's, God, who was from Michigan, a former senator.
So not Vandenberg. Who would it be?
It was. Let me look at this real quick. Don Regal. So he starts out as a Republican, and but like from the onset was like pretty liberal by like any like meaningful standards, right? He didn't vote particularly in line with that party. He became a Democrat. I can't remember if it was while he was in the House or in the Senate, because he was in the House briefly. Um, yeah, I guess it was during the time in the House he defects during Watergate. So like that's an example. You still have like some folks like that, right, where they are just not properly sorted ideologically, for if for people who might not be as familiar with that. But really, I would say like to an extent, um, you're right that like a lot of those people have sort of like the K6 and people like that who have sort of faded from relevance and whatnot. To an extent, that's sort of a it's sort of two phenomenon, right? It's like on one hand, I would say both of us are probably much more left-leaning and radical than we were in 2016, where we would probably find even Kasich pretty disgusting in a lot of his policies now.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, so there's like that going on, but there's also the fact that like even if we're like, okay, let's just accept that like in terms of American mainstream politics, that's your moderate. Yeah, he's like people like that aren't particularly relevant. I think Ohio's current governor, I had like he's tried to sort of who is their current governor?
Mike DeWine, is that it?
Yeah, DeWine like was kind of a little in that Kasich mold for a bit, but I've heard he's kind of done some stupid things as well. So I don't know. I mean, but like in general, right? Like in terms of like mainstream national relevance, yeah, like the people like Kasich are just gone.
Yeah, and it's like I think to that end too, you have to look at it in the context of like the American parties moving away from being regional formations to being fully ideologically driven, and to that end, even I don't know how consistent the ideology of the Republican or the Democratic Party is, aside from this arbitrary. I don't know. I never like the American definitions for liberal and conservative, but that's what we have.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like the new, I wouldn't call it a new regional form, or sorry, the new alignment. What I would rather say is like, this is what end of history politics in America has become, is the culture war fully sublimating it, while there's a quiet consensus on things like maintaining hegemony, the military industrial complex, and all of that.
Yeah, and like that's like kind of the more elite driven views that I think are kind of I would say like it's just sort of people like live like just blissfully ignorant of, I think, in the masses. I think you talk to a lot of people that are like, oh yeah, like I'm not really for war or for like military industrial complex, but they'll never determine their vote or policy preferences based on those particular distinctions.
Yeah, people are blissfully unaware, and also it's like even if you do pay attention, it's like what levers of power do you have involvement in as a citizen?
Sure.
In these, whether it's like energy policy or foreign policy. I think like they're fundamentally both untransparent and also just unaccountable to the average person.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
So yeah, I don't know. My way I've been trying to rationalize looking at the Republican primary at this point is as a shonen anime with Trump as the lead.
Yeah, I mean, there's no. I think it's the best. I mean, and obviously, Trump does kind of have the maturity of a shonen or young boy. So yeah, I mean, it makes sense. They did just get good old Will Hurd has kind of jumped in.
Who cares about Will Hurd? Oh my god!
And he's someone as well where like I guess he's sort of like he was sort of like a moderate person in the terms of like how moderate Republican can be, but like even then, right, against like it's just like so much of what they did under like what even like moderates did under Trump who were in office, and I believe he was in office for some duration in that time, they just kind of like they had to compromise whatever like morals they had anyways to sort of just blend in. Then it's like, can you really claim to be like moderate in any meaningful fashion at that point?
Yeah, especially when like the culture war is what drives the modern right at this point, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think they all agree on, like, war with Iran. They all agree on, like, maintaining the police state as it currently stands. They all agree on crushing labor organization and any even like towards any movement towards a gentler capitalism. They're opposed to it. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the moderate means here. I'm really not sure what that means.
Well, and I was thinking even too, because I've seen like there's I guess some Republicans who are still sort of slightly pro-choice. Like in the Senate, you've got like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, but like, and like other individuals, throughout the country. But like even then, like they've kind of been forced like into like this weird situation where like it's. I mean, you could already argue the whole abortion question sort of like dominated their party politics, anyways. But it's ever since Dobbs, it's completely subsumed everything. That like you now have you can't take a moderate position on that in the Republican Party, right? Or even just like a slightly like pro-choice position at all. Like you have to just go all in on this stuff now. So there really is, I think, very little lane culturally, economically, or whatever that like that you see any moderation represented on the right.
Yeah, and I don't think, like, I mean, I almost wonder if like the performative anxiety and performative like outrage of the Tea Party painted them into this corner, because I'm not gonna say that like the Tea Party and the hashtag resistance to Trump are necessarily the same phenomenon. I think they're different formations entirely, but there is this like element of performative outrage and like a sense of like amongst the members of it, to me, of like, why are you not as afraid or outraged as I am about this? Yeah, like that's my observation of it. And
I think that's fair.
Yeah, and I think like with the Tea Party, it's like I'm not exactly the most stalwart defender of Obama's legacy. I have several things I want to say about the Obama years, but in terms of what he actually did, which is still maintain the conflict in the Middle East, you could argue that police violence got worse under Obama's watch. Deportations got higher under Obama, and like the conditions for the gig economy in effect happened under Obama's watch, right? He did nothing to implement American socialism the way these guys were scared of it.
No, I mean, and I think like it's the issue with a lot of these people in general is like you want to live in the America that they're afraid of, right? Like you want to live in the America that they supposedly claim to see, right? You want to see like this socialist hegemonic state. I mean, not hegemonic, but like like what I mean, you want to see like this these circumstances that they sort of like claim emerged under Obama, and like that's not true. And it's funny because I've noticed like there's been a slight shift towards Trump where there's sort of this acknowledgement of like where like you'll see like right wingers like sort of criticize Obama from like kind of ostensibly a left wing position. And I think that's just kind of like there's sort of this acknowledgement that they can sort of win over people that are kind of in that like Jimmy Dore type persuasion, right? Where like a lot of like the kind of critiques that he levies are, mostly at, left wingers or, people who are more left wing, seemingly for the objective to move people to the right. Not that they openly admit
that's the Mussolini strategy, right? Is Mussolini
Yeah.
starts out as a socialist and then literally is the harbinger of fascism in Italy, right? But
yeah,
I think that only arises in an environment where you have liberals as the left writ whole. There's no like critique of capitalism. There's no critique of U.S. hegemony and U.S. imperialism. So as a result, like when someone does make that systematic critique that you want, they can then just like inject a whole slew of bullshit. That's the
Yeah.
Dora model. That's the Mussolini model. I mean, hell, like this is not the scholarship is already extensive. People have already been talking about this, about how fascists use left wing imagery and left wing language to launder and dupe people, and that's why like ideologically committed socialists, communists, anarchists, however you identify. This is why it's important to one have zero tolerance for it, but also like this is why reading theory and why consistency of language matters, so that you don't fall for this shit. Anyways, all that being said, your point stands.
Yeah, and I think it's as we were saying that like we have just so much of like just that nebulous nonsense. Maybe we've a lot of people could criticize it as like faux outrage over the Obama years and over different like cultural things. But it's kind of it is just sort of all subsuming. I mean, certainly like if and maybe John McCain got too much credit for it in some ways, right? But like when he like said that Obama's not a Muslim. And that was seen as like it's a really humanizing moment for him, right? And people, I mean, some people blame him for like losing the election on that line. I mean, that's absurd. That's definitely not true. But like,
Yeah,
like if he were to do that, the modern Republican Party would probably call a hit on him.
and that's also just giving John McCain too much credit. I think like the real tragedy, in my opinion, is that Obama was successfully able to levy this desire for progressive change and spin it into this image of himself as this like liberatory figure, and then he didn't deliver on it eventually.
Yeah.
I think it's a little too charitable to blame John McCain for self-sabotage. I think it's like that's a very...
Well, I mean, it also just ignores like the national context at the time, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it's just like the economy was like wrecked by a Republican president. Like it was it was very difficult for like anyone to win at that point. But my point stands, like you can't like that's how bad the culture wars. And I mean, obviously, I mean, there's always kind of that like weird criticism where like even like supposed like people who are like supposedly left leaning, where they're like, oh, how nice of him to do that, like say he's not a Muslim, and it's like it sort of inherently suggests that there is inherently a problem with him being a Muslim if he were a Muslim.
There's that aspect to it too, and what it is like it kind of reflects this like I don't know, like this.
Well, at the time we just conceded completely to the war on terror.
Yeah,
right. I mean, that's really what it is. That like every facet of it, right? We conceded to the idea that it was like somehow like the modern day Crusades, Christians against Muslims, and like that has like a ton of. And we still have. I would say we never really recovered from it. We just sort of moved on, and never really tried to heal like any of those divides.
Yeah, I think whatever dark force that was still exists in the zeitgeist, and it's changed shape a couple times. It's shed its skin a couple times, but it's still there in the culture, and it's not a good force. But I think like to that end too, I think like what that criticism of McCain in that moment like kind of sheds to me is like I think there were people who wanted the mask to come off at some point and be like, nah, this whole like decorum and the civil discourse thing, we can collapse it immediately in the name of our project or whatever,
right?
And I think that force has also transformed itself into like I think that it did not directly pave the way for Trump, but like I think the desire to like go mask off has been latent for many years.
I mean, I think it's essential to get to that point where Trump is like kind of the man for that side of it. But yeah, it might not have been as direct journey.
Yeah, it's not like there was a conspiracy hatched. If there is, God, I was wrong. But it's not like 50 years ago there was a smoke-filled room and saying on 2016 we will throw the lever for Trump. I don't think that happened per se.
Yeah. Well, Speaking of conspiracies,
Yes,
maybe
yes.
now is the time to pivot over to the Democratic primary for a second.
Okay. So Brandon is also, again, has kind of gone dark when he's not tripping over at graduation ceremonies. There's very little we hear about him. I am gonna say. Um, Someone who is starting to take up a little more oxygen in the room is one Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So before I go off, what's been your read on this guy?
So, I mean, we've talked before, like that he has like these, and I think you sent me this post. I think really perfectly illustrates like just who and what he is, right? Which was like saying that he's basically like the Democratic candidate that like your uncle found palatable before he just votes for Trump in the general, anyways.
Yeah.
Like and I think that's like 100% spot on. And we talked before about how he has like he's an OG anti-vaxxer. That's sort of his claim to fame. And I think some of his other work that might have been a little bit more useful for like humanity and whatnot. I think it has been kind of subsumed by that. And it's I think increasingly clear that he is not only just an anti-vaxxer and all that encompasses, but he is also just a general lunatic at this point. Whether or not he always was or not, I mean, maybe that's up for discussion. But at this point, the dude is unhinged.
And it's not that I want to say he's unhinged, like just because he's say anti-vaccine bad. That's very
He's just
reductive.
asking questions about
It's
the big
it's
pharmaceutical industry.
it's not just that. It's like he sounds so whiny and weepy, and he just has this like grumbling old man aesthetic that's just so unappealing.
Yeah,
Like
he definitely has that thing going against him that like I think people said was like true of DeSantis, where like a lot of people liked the idea of him more than they would in reality because they had never heard him like speak or anything like that because he has that weird, kind of whiny voice too.
he is not a good
But, like,
orator. He is not a good speaker. I will
yeah,
say
and
that.
but like RFK Jr. just sounds like I mean he makes Joe Biden sound like he's fresh out of the womb almost. It's
Yeah,
just like this raspy, like whiny voice that like it's just
th-
so weird.
those RFK genes did not make it through. You feel me?
Yeah.
He does not have the RFK charisma.
Well,
That is a
there might, to be fair, there may or may not have been something in the water that might have impacted that.
But okay, to this point, right, is like the the thing about the anti-vax stuff that we said like a couple episodes ago, I think still applies, which is like there is a vested critique that profit medicine has not properly won the trust of the public. You can argue that there's this elitist mindset that certain medical practitioners have, and it creates divides between the public and medical practitioners. And you can definitely have doubts about pharmaceutical companies. That being said, how the fuck else are you supposed to manage disease in the modern world?
Anarchy. Come on, it's the answer to everything. Embrace it.
Well, I mean, but that's the thing, right? It's like I don't know how to say this, right? Other than like
I mean,
there's
it's like I think I don't necessarily know that like people in his position truly wholeheartedly believe what they're saying, but I know like people in like like sort of the laymen, if you will, sort of probably do subscribe to like this sort of Darwinian theory of survival of the fittest and whatnot. They probably don't give a shit about how you manage diseases. They it's like people who can't survive the disease just die, and who gives a shit. I think is probably what a lot of like the average, quote unquote, average person sort of sees out of that.
well, and also just like the whole like vaccines cause autism thing is like I mean, let me really go this angle, right? It's like how fucking reductive is that? That like this condition that we barely even understand, and like now that we have neurodivergence as a theory to explain some of this, like how fucking eugenicist and like reductive it is to like just blame vaccines for it. And it's like, oh, it's like I don't know. It's like every time this certain class of adults talks about like autism, especially in kids,
Mhm.
it feels like an excuse to call like a kid an arsler. That's really what that feels like to me at this point.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I mean, it's when the real ones are them, right? But
Well, in all seriousness, though, it's like RFK Jr.'s worldview is one that is wildly inconsistent to me. It is one where, like,
wildly reactionary.
wildly reactionary, and it's also one where it's like, people are like, oh, but he's a little more pilled on certain aspects. Like, okay, I buy some of the stuff about maybe Sirhan may not have been responsible directly for RFK's death. Maybe that's one thing. But then for him to be like, hey, I got a couple questions about JFK's death, but no, CIA agents are upstanding and moral people who are
Right.
patriots. It's a very inconsistent view to hold, even in that sphere. And then to top it off, like, for him to be like, oh, we should talk about the US empire, but Israel is the only real democracy in the Middle East. It's wildly incompatible, incoherent, and basically like, rather than just call him a hack or rather than just call him like disingenuous, I'm just going to say what I always say. These inconsistencies can always be explained when somebody doesn't center a critique of capitalism and US hegemony at the heart of their political analysis. If you don't center that, you will remain inconsistent in all of this. And that's RFK. Already, yeah. I don't believe that like just simply voting for anybody is not going to give you salvation. Especially not RFK.
Well, and I mean, let's kind of get into some of the recent stuff that he has said too. I mean, he was on, of all people, Jordan Peterson's show. To copy the Jimmy Dore critique, if he was on our show, we would probably not be talking ill of him. That would be a good thing if he was on our show. But the fact that he would, go on Jimmy Dore instead, really bad. But no, and seriously, or not Jimmy Dore, Jordan Peterson, really bad. But he's like talking about how, like, I mean, literally, this is almost verbatim the meme of Alex Jones talking about turning the freaking frogs gay. He suggests that there's like contaminants in the water that are making people trans and stuff like that, which sort of, I mean, I suggests that he kind of has an issue with trans people as well. I haven't looked deeply enough into it to buy in to know one way or the other, but still.
I mean, that's the thing, right? Is like these guys always like compress elements of things they've heard into like their own neuroses and like bigotry, right? And it's like, yeah, we can talk about certain like pharmaceutical pollutants, microplastics that disrupt people's endocrine systems and their hormonal responses. And like, yeah, we can talk about how like, microplastics do cause like fertility issues. That has nothing necessarily to do with a changing mindset about gender and the role of gender in people's lives.
Right.
Those are somewhat mutually exclusive. And the thing is, I always know the critique is bullshit because it never gets spun into, and this is why we need to have stronger regulations on pollution. It never gets spun into, and this is why we need to have stronger regulation of corporations on pollutants, and like we need to strengthen like environmental regulation. It never gets spun into that. Never gets spun into that.
Well, and that's the problem too. Is like it's all that stuff that's, and it's also like kind of like it's sort of suggesting that like it sort of pushes the responsibility off on just like some weird neoliberal world order that's intentionally doing this for conspiratorial purposes. Not that it's being done because corporations see benefit in not having to pay to like clean the water or stuff like that.
I mean, it's like everyone is looking for like the version of reality getting bad that matches their personal hysteria rather than just looking at their own lives. You're gonna live in the pod, buddy. You live in an apartment. You've been shut out of home ownership. There's your pod. You're gonna eat the bugs, buddy. The USDA is already allowed a certain level of like bug parts in your food. You know what I mean? It's like I don't know how to say it. It's like the reality you live in is already plenty bad enough. Why are you fantasizing about a dystopia
Well,
other
I mean,
than
that's the microchip thing, right? Too, right? Right. So, they already have all that stuff to track you on like your cell phone and whatnot. Like, what are you hoping to accomplish by avoiding the implantation? I mean, not and that yet those same people are like celebrating Neuralink and and whatnot too.
it,
So like,
and I think like the point we made like a couple episodes ago, I think still stands. Is like, yes, there is a valid and necessary critique of the pharmaceutical industry that needs to be made. Yes, there have been several failures in the way that the US government responded to COVID-19. But here's the thing, I don't, it's just the whole thing about this like being a manufactured like thing or like like a fake thing like always gets me because it's like, okay, then why did China and Russia, the enemies of the US, have to take this thing seriously too? You know what I mean?
right, yeah, and it's like like, oh well, China did this. Okay, well then why did like China, sort of, why did all those Chinese people die? It's like, oh, it's just collateral damage, or even like um but back when like the oil prices went down, right, where it was like, oh, it was like a Russian conspiracy. It's like their entire economy is oil. And like, oh, just to hurt like a few American manufacturers in the short term, like that's insane.
and like what it always comes down to me, like with some of this stuff, is like it's this uh paranoia that results from a lack of meeting a certain expected like level of consumer convenience you get as an American that instantly gets downplayed as a holy shit, I can't get my Sour Patch Kids, we're dying. That's how I read. That's how I look at this, and it's like, like, of
Or
course,
I mean, what was the like in Michigan specifically, right? The people are like, I can't go to the store to get my seeds to grow my food, and it's like these are people who they've probably have never even touched a fucking stove in their life, let alone grown food.
that was the biggest thing that got revealed. Is like, wow, a lot of you don't know how to cook. A lot of you don't know how
Yeah.
to.
Right.
I mean, I will say, like, it is a weird look to be like, well, you should let people grow their own food, but at the same time, like, there was a degree of like what I can only call suburbanite hysteria.
Yeah. Because like again, it's like it was never like in good faith, right? It's like if this was like like, yeah, should you be able to grow your own food? Yeah, sure. Like I would agree, but like it was done by people where that like this is like someone who like their wife is the only person who cooks in the household. They wouldn't touch a garden hose with a 100-inch pole. Like it's all that stuff where it's just like it's like the worst actors raising like these critiques that it kind of has that bad effect of like sort of invalidating sort of those things, right? Which is sort of what we argued about like anti-vaxxers, right? Is it sort of they sort of put a limitation on like the credibility of meaningful criticisms on the pharmaceutical industry because they're saying like really crazy and stupid stuff that is kind of not really based in reality. Um, and ignoring, maybe broader pictures, right? Where it's like, well, what about insulin prices and all that? And like, they don't want to have that conversation.
Yeah, and like we missed the major fucking conversation in all of this, which is like the American state's inability to manage crisis.
Yeah.
Especially at the cost of shutting down the market. That's really what this is about.
100%.
Anyways, this is again like we've said earlier. We have tried to stay away from relitigating COVID. Truth be told, all American political discourse seems a lot like severe mental illness. The way that people just black in and out of their
I'm pretty sure I've acquired severe mental illness just working on this show. Not on you, but just like just like everything, like having to look at all this stuff all the time.
But that's what I'm saying is like I don't know another culture that has this much cultural amnesia, that has this much historical amnesia about things
maybe
that
some
happen.
Fictional ones.
Maybe, but that's what I'm saying, right? It's like within our lifetime, we've had like all this stuff happen, and like people will just forget about it and then be like, "Oh shit, yeah, that happened. Oh well."
Right.
Anyhow, any freaking how. That's all I got to say on RFK. I really don't want to say anything else. Obviously,
I mean, yeah, I will say, like, I mean, the one thing I haven't really gotten to like really stress yet, it's incredibly disappointing that this is like the leading anti-Biden primary challenger, right? Like, I'm not necessarily, like saying like, oh man, we really gotta like, beat this guy in the primary and find someone better to replace Biden, right? I mean, that's just not how like things are realistically going to play out. But like the fact that like sort of this is the best like internal opposition that like Democrats can come up with is basically a gentler Republican in terms of the issues that he wants to focus on, right? Like he's not campaigning meaningfully on the stuff that you might actually care about or be interested in. He's campaigning on like weird shit. That's like entirely kind of like culture war nonsense. And like, I mean, you have Marianne Williamson who's doing worse than him, but it's kind of disappointing that this is sort of like, if you look at like, the party in sort of a nutshell, it's like, man, this is like really disappointing if like these are your choices, right?
I mean, if you think about it, RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson are fundamentally just podcasters at this point.
I mean, yeah, there's that. So I think that's a great segue to announce that we are running for president.
Oh my freaking god!
know,
Fuck it, why not? We jest.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! I guess I don't know. We have yet to see how this Democratic primary is going to play out, but as Brandon remains in the shadows, I don't think RFK's star is rising, but I think he is like trying to suck a little oxygen out the room right now.
Yeah, and I think it's benefiting no one. I guess he's making some money. I would hope. Why else would you put yourself through this? I mean, personally, I hope he's not making money. Well, but that's kind of.
I mean, again, like our last prediction of like what the last time Marianne Williamson ran, she was able to parlay that into a media career. Right. RFK has already had his own like. I mean, he was like what Ring of Fire Radio and like a bunch of other shows. So like, worst case.
Was it Rogan too?
Rogan didn't run, but he did get on Rogan. I think he did get on Rogan.
Yeah.
So I mean, but a lot of people get on Rogan. Once you have a certain profile, you get on it. It's like Oprah, but
I remember that. I mean, the tangent, but God, I remember that discourse when he like endorsed Bernie Sanders, and people acted like that was like basically like getting endorsed by Hitler.
I mean, again, it's the thing about Joe. The thing about Joe Rogan is like this guy has no consistency. He has no intellectual.
I think he is a good like myopic of like the American public at large.
Yeah, like
I think that his views are generally more mainstream. Maybe not like some of his vax stuff's a little weird, but like I think a lot of his stuff is sort of like if like I know like probably no one in my family actually listens to him. But like he probably perfectly represents exactly how they view the world.
I think yeah, it's just like I don't know. I used to listen to Joe Rogan until like it got to be too much, right? But the thing is like Joe Rogan's whole shtick is that he was the first guy to like really take advantage of the platform, and what he's great at is just being a sponge to let people talk for 3 hours straight. So sometimes you can get some good content out of that, especially if your guest has like some integrity or has something cool to say. And I think that's why like the Bernie episode of Joe Rogan like was handled so well, is like finally Bernie has a space to just like talk unopposed by like the usual liberal intelligentsia for like a couple hours.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is like, Joe Rogan will just have anyone fucking on and just basically agree with them, Yeah. How else do you have like back-to-back weird appearances? Like you've got fucking Jordan Peterson one week, Killer Mike the next, freaking you know what I'm saying? But then like, it just hit a point where like he was having back-to-back intellectual dark web guys, and like the thing is like Joe Rogan's a dumb guy with libertarian impulses. And they know what buttons to press, and they know like how to get rebooked for another episode. And pretty much Joe Rogan's happy to be taken along for the ride as long as he can sell boner pills. So here we are.
Yeah,
it's the same structures of media that have always existed, and just because I mean, I feel guilty about this all the fucking time. It's like, just because I claim to be independent, just because I don't draw like any profit from this, it doesn't mean that like I'm not couched within the same structure. And you'd argue like, yeah, all alternative media, quote unquote, is couched in the same structures, and that's how you end up with RFK Jr. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, good way to put it.
So let's maybe get to a little bit of other news, because we do got to wrap up pretty soon. This OceanGate disaster, my God. Oh man, this is just classic billionaire hubris.
It's got to be one of the funniest things. My favorite meme that I've seen for it was, it was like the Galaxy Brain meme, right? But it was like the first stage was like, hoping they're okay, and then the second stage was like, not really giving a shit what happens to them because they're billionaires, and then there was like the next stage after that was wanting them to survive just so they can see all the mean memes that have been made about them. Like, yeah, that's kind of, it's so weird where it's like, I mean, like I heard this story and I was like, why do I give a shit about this?
No,
like, do I give a shit? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I mean, and then it was just, the more I like looked into it, the more I was like, this is actually like, I mean, maybe it's dark, but it's like, it's pretty funny.
It's an opportunity for a little Schadenfreude, I will say that. But it's like, again, like, it is funny that this story is sucking up so much oxygen in the public consciousness right now, when like, a boat in the Mediterranean carrying like refugees, yeah, capsized, and no one's looking into it. Meanwhile, a couple rich guys voluntarily look at this poorly built tube.
Oh my God, dude! Like,
what is millionaires and tubes? What is it?
I don't know. I mean, it like, I just like you look at that thing, it looks like a fucking coffin, like just aesthetically, anyways.
And it's like, you don't even get to look at the Titanic. There isn't even a porthole. There is a camera and like a shitty projector that's going to show it on the wall.
Just send a drone down there. Like,
it'd be more fun. Go like dive yourself. Like, what the?
I mean, so it's like, I mean, obviously, I mean, there's the fact that they're like going down there to literally look at a mass grave site anyway, which is like, I mean, it's pretty dark. That's kind of just like where we're at, like in this stage of capitalism, right? Is like, we're like, literally the deaths of others is like a spectator sport. And I guess, it is for us too, in the sense that, we're watching, these folks who are probably dead. But my favorate thing about it is the Logitech controller. It's like, I own one.
My God.
I was like telling my mom, I'm like, do you want to see how they controlled that sub? Here's a physical representation. Like, this thing can barely drive a fucking car in some video games, and these fuckers expected to control a sub with it. Like,
oh my God, no! They had like these weird, like modified, like joysticks too, and like super like jerry rigged. I don't know.
Yeah, it made it look like, I mean, like it's already an like, I mean, like you can literally buy one for like $30 fucking bucks. Like, and it made it look like even more like knockoff and cheap. And I'm like, I don't know what those are supposed to do. Maybe they like add some sensitivity to it, but it's like, man, like, that's for like the simulators, not for, real life. But here we are.
I'd rather have Switch controllers with Joy-Con drift than this.
Right? Yeah. It's just like, oh no, we're into the wall of the Titanic. Hasn't most of it collapsed by now anyways? Like, I know it was supposed to be like nothing but like just a rust stain on the bottom of the ocean by like relatively soon. So I don't even know what there is left to see down there.
Well, just like everything about it, like all the information's out there. I'm sure our listeners have already looked at this by the time like this comes out, but they were really unserious about its construction. It was never safety rated to ever go that deep.
Yeah.
It just, the experience itself, it's not like it's going to be anything fun. You're literally in a steel tube with like 5 other guys.
Was like the plan to like was the plan to like because they like sold tickets to one or two other people, right?
Like for a
And like
quarter mil a piece.
was the plan to like just like, all right, like we're gonna leave this money with like the family and just get ourselves killed intentionally? Was this like just an insurance fraud scheme?
Some people believe that. I really don't know. I really don't know. What I know is that at the time of recording, allegedly the oxygen's run out in the tank.
Yeah, they had like 96 hours, and I'm pretty sure that that timer has maybe elapsed by now.
Yeah, and it's like I don't know. Like there's a lot of the usual discourse anytime something like this happens. It's like, oh, how dare you take some joy in this? Oh, even though they're billionaire, like it's like I'm not gonna get into this because it turns into the whole civility discourse as usual. But let's just get into this simple. Like, fine enough. I'm not gonna relish in this. But what I will say is that no shit, this would happen when you've been like made to feel bulletproof your whole life. Your wealth has blinded you from consequences. And
A
rather than
lot, a lot has happened recently, but especially this year, that I think has probably kind of rocked the worldview that like billionaires have like they've earned their wealth by being smart and stuff like that.
and as
Like
it, as it turns
between
out,
this and Musk, right? Like it's just like, man, like these people are doing some stupid fucking shit.
and I mean that's the whole thing is like every tale of like this industrious captain of industry who built themselves up from nothing but their hard work and their raw genius is either like the exception, not the rule, or it's all hagiography, like it's always been.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like, I mean, these guys are literally like the villain from Up, right? I mean, like that's basically like he went on this expedition, and like, I mean, that's basically what this is. Um, it's just like weird, like because like and like that's like based on like a phenomenon like from like the like the adventurism of like the like early 20th century, and it's like that's stuff supposed to be like done and buried, right? And I guess not. Like,
Well, I mean, that's the thing is like these guys, like, you don't work for a living, you don't deal with problems the way everyone else does, and you have all this money to like try to fill the emptiness in your life, and in this case, they ended theirs. I'm not here to cast moral judgment only because I don't care about relitigating the civility discourse. But what
sure.
I will say is like the entire cultural image we have of rich people, one has always been a fig leaf, but especially because of stories like this, deserves to be called into question.
Hmm.
The entire basis of, well, we should value our elite, that we should be nicer on taxing them, that we shouldn't see them as exploiters but rather as leaders of our society. It's all a massive fucking farce. And this
Yeah.
is just one microcosm of that reality,
Yeah.
as salacious and somewhat funny as it is.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary.
And on the subject of billions, how I mean this story just broke, but like an accidental accounting error leading to 6.2 billion ending up in Ukraine.
Yeah, so this is kind of another one of those stories where like there's a nuance to how the Ukraine aid is like spent. Like it's not like we've just like handed over a blank check.
Of course.
This is basically I can't remember what the specifics of like the equipment was, but because what our expenditures there is basically sending such and such worth of equipment there. And I believe the accounting error was basically that like they incorrectly valued whatever the equipment was that we sent. Obviously, it kind of just highlights to just the sheer level of like waste in general from like our military, right? That like because I mean that's the thing is like we're sending them like yesteryear's models and stuff like that for like equipment. Like we're not sending them anything like cutting edge. Like I know there was the controversy of us like sending like the F-16 over there. That thing's like fucking 50 years old. You know what I mean? Like we've kind of moved beyond that, and I think this just sort of. I mean, it's sort of the. I think it's a story about the excesses of the military-industrial complex more than it is about Ukraine specifically.
Yeah, and I think it's just like again, something like this just being reported matter of fact with no like real accountability that we will ever find out about is just kind of proof that like this again this unfortunate conflict that's been like prodded along and massaged for like the vicarious entertainment of Americans, like it has real consequences here as well as to the people who are impacted by it. And I just don't I don't think it's being given the care and attention it needs. Like I think people want to pick sides of who's more moral or who's more like them, but it's like this is the war machine at work here.
Yeah, I mean, and like, I mean, there's sort of just like kind of the, there's kind of that the natural like aversion to imperialism. No matter who the actor is, right? And in this case, it's mostly Russia that's sort of the imperial power there, right? I mean, there's some debate over if this is more so retaliation or not. I mean, it's I don't know. I mean, Russia and the United States aren't exactly
Yeah, and
they're
I'm
not
not here
necessarily
to
the great, moral rivals. I mean, there's definitely some moral equivalencies between them over, just the decades of, the past, the Cold War era and beyond. The one other thing I did kind of want to note is, I think the way this was reported, because I remember like seeing like the press conference clip, and it was, as you said, reported just very matter of factly. To me, it also highlights kind of like the political ineptitude of our bureaucrats.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
I remember, I don't know if you saw this. This was kind of a flash in the pan moment, but there was a brief report from the CDC where they had said that I want to say it was a specific variant of the Pfizer vaccine, and they said that it's no longer, no longer cleared for human use. And they had that as an isolated tweet in this thread, but it just said that. Like that the Pfizer, but even though it was meant a very specific version of it, but of course anyone like who, I mean, it's like you would have to be brain dead not to see that like conservatives would retweet that specific one and say, here's the proof that we were right to be, skeptical of these people all along. And
Exactly.
it's like they do not consider the fact that like people will react very angrily. Because I mean, this was trending yesterday, with just like, oh look, like fuck the Ukrainians because they're getting all this money. It's like, well, it's not so much that we like, oh, just happened to lose that much money. They just didn't properly catalog how much certain equipment should be worth. And yeah, so to me, it's just a highlight. I mean, like there's billions of, even before 9/11, before when there wasn't really any use for that equipment, right? There was like just like a report about like, oh yeah, like the Pentagon can't account for a ton of money. Not that they necessarily classified it. They just did like, oh yeah, we don't know what it was spent on. Like, sorry.
And that's really what I'm getting at, right? Is like, I'm not here to defend Russia, and I'm not really here to like uh go full weeb for Ukraine either. But like, it is that thing where like the the lack of transparency in the Defense Department in our entire military industrial complex, and it's just the sheer burden of cost that it is on just the United States and the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's astounding. It's just it's one of those things that because of how our society is currently structured, you can't even bring that into question. It's
Well,
easier.
I think too, it should also just like it should highlight just in general, like anyone who's like eager for us to go to war with like anyone, right? Like think about this, right? This is like the cost to like just us for like a war, right? That we're not even like directly invested in, right?
Exactly.
And like it goes up for us, our allies, and like just the general impact on the world economy, right? I mean, that's like really what we've been sort of reeling with, right? I mean, there was there's still the after effects of the pandemic, the diminishment of the workforce and all that stuff, kind of as all a result of that, and then you have this having various impacts on the global economy as well, and like this is kind of like, I mean, that if you want like here's like your anti-war position, not like not a chance to like grift on some pro Russia stance or some whatever, right? It's like this is just the general cost of conflict.
Right. Right. And it's like again, like Had it not been for a certain degree of U.S. escalations, maybe this could have been avoided. That's still my personal opinion on the matter, but you know, regardless of what happened, there was always an opportunity for the MIC to find a way to finesse certain goods and certain profits out of this, and we're seeing it in action today. And that's the real, as innocent people are harmed, that is the real crime in all of this. That's my personal view.
Sure.
Anyhow, any freaking how. All I can say is it's not a good look that Biden's meeting with Modi right now. Not without, I mean, again, like the Biden administration's been pretty quiet about India lately, which I'm not sure what they would gain by taking a strong stance either direction, but
we're probably, I mean, this is more your roundhouse since you're more invested, but we're probably overdue, honestly, to maybe like have a little bit more of a India politics focus.
We do. I need to read a little more.
There's been a lot going on. A lot of stuff on, like just with like Twitter censorship, where Musk has basically kind of been like the pawn of that government, despite claims that he's about free speech. Heavy asterisk there, apparently.
I mean, you could argue that like the tech sector's weird turns it's been taking has been a result of like massive investments in the Indian market.
That seems to be a major component to it, right? Because I mean, the whole tech industry in general has just been kind of like in a really fucked place for a minute.
Right, and it's like I don't know, like my personal view, and this is one thing that's like I need to study, but also like I don't see anyone else talking about it, which is why like it's something I want to do a little more reading on. Is like introducing smartphones in India and getting people on like want to buy like the smartphone as a product, but then all of the suite of services that comes with it, including like gig economy things for food delivery, social media apps, and like the massive advertising base that becomes. It's not for nothing that Modi has this like town hall with like Mark Zuckerberg a couple years ago. It's not for nothing that his regime, in addition to like the culture war being turned up to 11 in India, also is one heavily characterized by foreign direct investment. So I don't know. That is an angle of study I hope people take an interest in. If not, it's going to have to be us. And we haven't had a chance to talk about this lately, but I just do want to shout out the writers' strike. I think it's great that we're getting a break from shitty TV.
Way to what a backhanded compliment to them too, right?
That's the thing is like,
hey, thank God we don't have to watch it.
But that's what I'm saying, right? Is like they've had to like put out such shitty work because of the demand to like pump out content. So it's like, and again, like the Disney industrial complex deserves to have its coffers drained over this. I do think that it's a net good to have something like this happen, even if it's like as we're facing the culture war as it currently stands. As we're still in a nascent moment for labor. Having a strike go on this long and like have it be perceived as positively is I see it as a net good.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Anyhow, happy second day of summer to everybody.
We made it.
We did make it. Josh, do you have anything you want to plug or any final thoughts before we start to close out?
I guess I'll just do a quick little plug for my other podcast, the MonsterPop podcast, pro wrestling podcast. I believe we are due, hopefully, assuming my co-hosts can pull through with their schedule, to make a comeback this week. We'd also been on a little bit of a hiatus as well for various reasons. But we'll hopefully be back with that as well. But we've got a decent backlog as well that's worth checking out, at least in my opinion.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's all I got for today. As again, always a pleasure doing this. Fun talking about our favorite Shōnen protagonist, Donald Trump.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure recording with you again, Josh, and it's always fun to do this for our listeners. So I'll have the links to MonsterPop as well as our show in the description below. Stay tuned for updates. Twitter is usually where we post them, and we'll see y'all next time. Take care, folks.
See ya.